Well, positive that the institution functions and it has done the right thing, but very grim, of course, that the ICC has indicted the prime minister of Israel and the former defense minister for war crimes and crimes against humanity, because this is absolutely extraordinary. I think it is not only a correct decision by the court, it's a very dramatic one. I hope that it can open some eyes in the United States. Some of the early reactions attacking the ICC, some of the senators calling this a kangaroo court and so forth, are a little sad, because there's an important message in this for the U.S. government. The U.S. has been complicit with Netanyahu, not only in the war in Gaza, but in many wars over the last 30 years. And I'm hoping that some people will recognize inside Washington that this is a message about Washington as well, and that we have to stop this complicity.
And what did you make of, in Washington, 18 Democratic senators joining with Bernie Sanders to vote for a measure calling for a halt to arms transfers to Israel? Of course, the measure was defeated because there was overwhelming bipartisan opposition to it. But this was a record number of senators, going on record voting to halt weapons transfers to Israel, all 18 of them.
Well, yes, it's a record number, but it's shocking that the U.S. government is so enthralled to these murderous extremists in Israel that you get 18 instead of 100 votes of the U.S. Senate. It's, of course, especially tragic that the administration, the executive branch, is utterly complicit and can't lift a finger to stop anything. And again, for me, while 18 senators vote for this, the U.S. continued to veto any path to peace in the UN Security Council, this time on a motion so clear, so overwhelming that even Britain parted with the United States, which is maybe once in a half century event that Britain would dare not do exactly what the United States does, but Britain voted for a ceasefire and the United States vetoed it. I just have had enough of this administration. That's been true for a long time, but I can't wait for it to leave. It's disgusting, and it is absolutely repulsive, not only in the Middle East, but in Ukraine and on so many fronts, that while there are big question marks about what's going to come, this one absolutely deserves to leave.
I was wondering if you could expand upon your comments that I heard during a recent interview with you. You said that Joe Biden is one of the worst presidents. Can you outline some of the many ways in which this is true?
Well, I'm referring especially to foreign policy. I've just never seen anything like this. The president himself and his extraordinarily weak team understand nothing about diplomacy. They have gotten us closer and closer to complete global disaster, World War III, nuclear Armageddon, whatever you want to call it. They led through their complete diplomatic failure Ukraine into a devastating war in which Ukraine has lost hundreds of thousands of people and territory for absolutely no reason, because this war never should have occurred. It could have been obviated entirely by Biden recognizing that his continued push of NATO enlargement to Ukraine was the casus belli, the reason for this war. And if he had acknowledged that and told President Putin in 2021, yeah, after all, it's a bad idea, NATO's not going to enlarge, this whole disaster could have been avoided. Of course, when it comes to the Middle East, they've been pathetic. A continued complete blank check for Netanyahu, complete inability to say anything as a genocide is underway. So I think nothing more needs to be said about that. The ICC warrant speaks for itself because the U.S. is completely complicit in all of the crimes that are outlined in this indictment. Then when it comes to China, I'm again amazed at the incompetence and the foolishness of it all, because this is another area I know well from firsthand experience over more than 40 years. And there is absolutely no reason we should be edging towards even this current imbecilic discussion in Washington, heading towards war by 2027 with China, a war that would be devastating for everybody and probably a devastating loss for the United States, if not for the whole world. But in any event, it shows, again, a complete failure of foreign policy. Biden, right now, we don't know whether he functions anymore. At least I don't. But Blinken and Sullivan, his two top lieutenants, do function, and they function badly and have done so the whole administration. So on every major issue, I've just seen them as a failure. For me, what's amazing is he actually overtook George W. Bush Jr., in my view, as the worst of all of this. Which is very hard for me to say, by the way, but he actually did. Biden has just gotten everything wrong, and now again, we don't really know whether he's even competent to be president, because I don't hear a word from him. I don't know whether I'm just missing the short snippets, but this is not in any way a normal administration at this point. Finally, let me just add an obvious point. Before the election, the Pentagon and the White House said that using U.S. missiles to strike deep inside of Russia was provocative, dangerous, and would not change the course of the war in Ukraine. And it was a relief. And then just a couple of weeks later, they've changed the policy. Again, not a murmur from the president, but something extraordinarily dangerous and unaccountable in terms of what kind of motivation this was or who actually made this decision. So I just add that to the tally of what has gone wrong.
When it comes to the motivation for this reversal from the Biden administration on the use of long-range U.S. weapons by Ukraine into Russia, we just got this from the New York Times. I'm not sure if you've seen this yet, but this is one explanation that they give. I'll quote it to you. The escalation risk of allowing Ukraine to strike Russia with U.S.-supplied weaponry has diminished with the election of Trump, Biden administration officials believe, calculating that President Putin of Russia knows he has to wait only 2 months for the new administration. So what I take from this is that if this account from the Times does reflect the Biden administration's thinking, that they're saying that their decision to now reverse course and let Ukraine use these weapons was influenced by the fact that Trump is in office. And they're banking that, well, because Russia knows that Trump is coming in and that things are going to change, that therefore they have 2 months to escalate and, see what happens.
It's possible that that's how they think, and it shows what imbeciles they are. Even if that's absolutely true, it's just imbecilic. I had not seen that. But how do you bank on things when it comes to nuclear to nuclear risks, to trying to understand escalation? Are they children? Are they playing some game? Is Jake Sullivan saying, "Well, yeah, it's probably now it's safe to do"? It's for what reason? So that Biden can say, "I did this," so you can blow up a few places in Russia because you think it doesn't really make a difference, or maybe it does, or who knows what. It's an interesting account, because if it's true and that's the explanation, it's absolutely absurd. Again, I've always thought of these people that if I had them in class, I'd be failing them because they're like the worst students. You just say, "Are you kidding?" Sorry, but that's a D if I'm being generous, and that one, Aaron, is a D.
Well, listen, if you think that's a D, then let me read you this. This is also from the same article in the Times. I had to read this twice to believe it.
I have to admire you. You still read the Times. I can't even read that newspaper, by the way. But anyway,
well, it reflects what these people think.
I know, no. I admit it's useful for me to understand what my neighbors think, but it is such a pile of trash that I can't read it for substance anymore. But anyway, please.
Well, let's hope that this is trash. What I'm about to read you, okay? Because listen to this. Several officials, and they're talking about U.S. and European officials, several officials have even suggested that President Biden could return nuclear weapons to Ukraine that were taken from it after the fall of the Soviet Union. That would be an instant and enormous deterrent to Russia. But such a step would be complicated and have serious implications. So according to this account from the Times, there are officials in the U.S. and Europe that are seriously contemplating putting nuclear weapons in Ukraine to restore quote unquote deterrence.
I'm speechless. I'm absolutely speechless. Is this a joke? And you use the font of the New York Times to imitate the story? Or is someone supposed to look at that and say, oh, that's good. Isn't that nice? Why don't we play that game too? Again, all I can say is we need to survive a few more weeks. Because this is the most shocking, stupid administration. But by the way, it is true. There are a lot of dangerous people in Washington, and that's always true. And I've always said that the most important job of a president is to put the foot on the brakes of the war machine. It's always revving. There's always someone who wants to do something incredibly stupid. There's always the chance for escalation. And the responsibility of the president is to say no. Now, we don't know whether the president honestly, we don't know whether he has the mental apparatus right now to do this job. And if not, we don't know who's running the White House. And it's a real question, by the way, because we know that everything is lies. We have all sorts of evidence of mental incompetence right now. And so it's absolutely dramatic. But, when everything is lies anyway, when the whole administration is performative narrative, when nothing is said that's truthful, when the New York Times reports garbage anyway, day in, day out, you just can't figure it out. But we used to have important decisions discussed and deliberated at least to an extent. Now we don't even have that at all. And so that's quite a statement. Boy, let's see what happens if we give them the nukes. Zelensky's a real responsible guy. That sounds like an absolutely terrific thing to do. Maybe give it to the Azov brigade. It sounds good to me. I should clarify because irony doesn't work very well right now. This is about the worst possible idea one can imagine, but I would not discount that somebody in Washington has it.
You're someone who has worked with these people. You've encountered very powerful people. You've been behind closed doors with them. What motivates them? And what is the most surprising thing you've ever seen or witnessed, or the most disturbing thing?
Well, first of all, there's a tremendous amount of groupthink. It's stunning. You can't walk out of that groupthink. You can't raise a doubt or a question without being excluded. So this is one point. I would say the deep state is true, which is that the U.S. has strategies that persist certainly between administrations, but really for decades. And I think that's essentially what we are witnessing right now. It has been the policy of the U.S. deep state or the permanent security state since around July 1945 to defeat the Soviet Union and then to defeat Russia. It wasn't more than a couple months at the end of World War II that all the U.S. guns and attention turned to the next war with our World War II ally, the Soviet Union. And I think it's shocking, the more that I have learned over my lifetime and the more that I've seen, the idea that everything was the fault of the Soviet Union and that it was Stalin doing this and Stalin doing that that set the whole Cold War in motion is absolutely false. There were just a lot of powerful people that believed that the next war was the war with Bolsheviks. These are people that were basically Nazi sympathizers before we went to war with Germany, fought Germany, but then expected the next war to continue immediately. And I say this because we went through 45 years of that Cold War. And by the time I was a bit of a grown-up, I was involved with the end of the Cold War in 1989, 1990. I became an advisor to Mikhail Gorbachev's economic team. In the last year, I became a key advisor to President Yeltsin's economic team in 1991 at the end of the year and in 1992 and so forth. I started to see this in action. I was a bit confused, I have to say, because I thought the Cold War was over at that point. I was hearing face to face from Yeltsin, we want to be normal, we want to be friends, we want to do everything. And it was true, absolutely. And what Gorbachev said was true, absolutely, that there would be a common European home from Rotterdam to Vladivostok. And he had the vision absolutely to end nuclear arms everywhere. Of course, as we know, that Reagan and Gorbachev almost agreed in Reykjavik in 1986 and so forth. I saw this with my own eyes. I heard it. I was involved with these people. And I saw over years how the United States said, no. That peace would mean mutual respect, that we would actually do things together. But don't you understand? The new world is we run the show. And we're not done yet. Our mission since 1945 is to defeat you. And now we need to see Russia divided. Maybe it will collapse into its ethnic pieces the same way the Soviet Union did. And we have the absurdities of our neocons who couldn't put Chechnya on a map, suddenly forming the Chechnya Friendship Committee as the CIA is running jihadists to destabilize Russia the same way that it tried to destabilize the Soviet Union. And U.S. withdrawing from nuclear arms agreements and overthrowing governments and the color revolutions and the coups and all the rest. You just can't make this stuff up. But my point is, what I've seen is the underlying continuity of this madness. We couldn't even take yes for an answer to the end of the Cold War. We had to go all the way to dismantle, to dismember Russia. And I think that's still the modus operandi of these crazy people in Washington. And they seem not to know how to stop before we really have that nuclear war, because every time we come close, they say, don't worry about that. That's their one line. Don't mention that risk. Oh, that's a bluff. That's a bluff. That's a bluff, until it's not a bluff. It's simply mind-boggling how wrong-headed all of this is, and how our government has become so closed down like a bunker that we hear nothing honest. There's no debate. There's no discussion. Congress is completely irrelevant in this. Where is the deliberation? It doesn't exist. There is no foreign policy discussion at this point of any sense at all. There isn't. And so it's all confidential, classified, behind closed doors, to the point where world-changing decisions are made, and we don't even have a clue as to how or where It involves no legislation, no public deliberation, no debate. They just happen. And even when such decisions are made that reverse decisions that were made just weeks earlier, no discussion. So this is really a government so dysfunctional and dangerous that it's extraordinary. I mean, did you ever think? I never thought in a million years I'd be saying I can't wait for Donald Trump to come back to the White House. But I'm actually saying it, and I mean it.
When it comes to the lack of public input and debate, I'm reminded of the time 2 years ago last month, Joe Biden was speaking at a fundraiser in Manhattan. And he just casually told the room that the world's never been closer to nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis. And of course, the room was alarmed, but Biden was just blurting this out as if this was totally fine, and as if he was some bystander who had no ability to stop it, when he was the one fueling the proxy war in Ukraine that was fueling that very strong risk of nuclear Armageddon that he was musing about. But
and Aaron, when that happened, what was amazing was that Biden was chastised. I remember the Wall Street Journal, I think the next day, and other mainstream media chastised the president for even talking in that way. You're not even supposed to mention that. Nuclear Armageddon. How dare Biden act with such indiscretion? In other words, the president had spoken out of turn. The only time we ever heard from him was when he was speaking to donors, and someone caught it like this. But the reaction of the media was, "Stop that talk. That could scare somebody."
Yeah.
What is it that makes you look forward to Trump returning to the White House?
Well, mainly Biden leaving. This is the main point. Biden, Sullivan, and Blinken leaving is such great news. I'm a little worried. They keep coming to Columbia University. My colleagues are now Hillary Clinton and Victoria Nuland. So no. God knows what's going to happen to my university next. But we need to get them out from where they are. With Trump, there's actually been some intelligent talk about ending the war in Ukraine. And this is quite notable. I actually think that's likely to happen. When it comes to the Middle East, heaven knows, because it's the Israel lobby everywhere, obviously, on all sides at all moments, and it's horrible. The only thing I'm somehow hoping is that Trump's instinct of not to be pushed around by those he doesn't want might somehow cause a moment of recognition that the U.S. is completely enthralled to Israel, and maybe he wouldn't like that on an individual level, but the whole system is rotten in Washington to the core on this. You think the guy that was indicted by the ICC today received 58 standing ovations a few weeks ago in the U.S. Congress when this indictment was pending and all of the facts about it were known. So it shows how completely rotten and broken the political system is in this regard. When it comes to China, it's also puzzling. Of course, anti-China rhetoric is as pervasive as it is mindless and ignorant. It's another area where I'm just stunned by the complete, can I say bullshit on your show?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. The complete bullshit every day about China. But Trump has said a couple of times that there's for him a difference of his tariffs and his trade war with the military side. That would be a breakthrough, because if you look at what is actually said these days in Washington, and again, according to people who chronologically are grown-ups, although they don't act like it, it is that we're preparing for war by 2027. And the Navy put out its brochure, Ready for War with China by 2027. That was the latest plan. And then there was another story. I admit I read the New York Times, that story, because it caught my attention on the website. It said the Pentagon preparing for war. And so I read this story. It was, I think, a week or two ago. And it was, yes, we're preparing for war with China. And I read the whole thing top to bottom, and it just treated straightforwardly, we're preparing for war with China. So I happen to know the reporter, and I wrote to her, said, thank you for writing this because you won't have time to write it afterwards. Well, I'll be dead in 10 minutes. So it was good that you have the World War III story up front, and left it at that, and then got a response back, actually. And the response said, well, I hadn't noticed, but I had written 3 times that the Pentagon doesn't want this war, but my editors had taken that out of my text, and I just hadn't noticed it. Okay, something's wrong. Something seriously wrong. Yeah.
Wow, that is really scary.
Yeah.
Wow. And this we just happen to know because you know about this, but imagine how frequently this happens, and we have no idea of the New York Times intervening and how the news is delivered.
By the way, when Nord Stream was blown up, and I said, rather obviously, didn't take an insider or a genius to know it. I said, the United States did this. A top New York Times reporter that I happened to encounter soon afterwards said, Jeff, of course. Who else? And I said, yeah, but your paper said it was probably the Russians this morning. And he looked at me and he laughed and he said, yeah, the editors. It's sad. It's not only sad, it's extraordinarily worrisome, but that is the reality.